Monochrome Mobius is a traditional JRPG in every sense of the word, from its turn-based combat to the plot that encompasses the fate of an entire kingdom, but the way it's executed elevates the adventure above many of the similar experiences on the PS4. Now you'll spend the bulk of your time exploring the vast world and taking on several mainline quests, as well as optional activities that pad out the adventure in meaningful ways. But as with most JRPGs, they all live or die on their battle system, and Mobius sees each character having a unique set of skills and area of expertise during combat. It utilizes a ring system, which is essentially the only area where the game deviates from the model first created with the original Dragon Quest, and sees a set of rings appear in the upper corner of the screen, each holding an icon that corresponds to one of your party members. When an icon reaches a particular position, that character's turn to attack occurs. Now that alone doesn't really differ from many other systems, but it's with the ability to move up and down the rings that helps it stand out. Compared to a character on the outer ring, you will spin around for a new turn considerably faster if you're on the inner ring. In the meantime, you'll gain an additional edge over your opponent if you can knock them into the outside of the ring, and this, along with an impressive range of moves to perform, serves to keep the player on their toes and adds an extra layer of strategy to the otherwise basic turn-based system many will know and love. It's clear that Monochrome didn't set out to reinvent the wheel, but it still manages to be an enjoyable game with a great story and a few interesting ideas when it comes to combat. If you're fond of JRPGs, I'd say Monochrome Mobius offers enough to try it out for yourself. Developed by From Software and originally released on the Xbox way back in 2004, Metal Wolf Chaos is an over-the-top mech combat sim that focuses on absolute mayhem and presents a somewhat satirical take on the United States. In the not-too-distant future, natural resources are running dry and major world economies are on the brink of collapse. This is where you're thrown into the mess as the ex-president of the United States and are branded as enemy number one. With the combined forces of the world against you, just how are you meant to survive? The answer, of course, lays with your big-ass mech that can carry up to 100 different types of weapons, as well as being able to fully customize it with a range of armor sets. Now, the gameplay in Metal Wolf will be extremely familiar to anyone who has played the likes of Armored Core, as you make your way through various locales, completing a range of objectives and collecting items. Most of these objectives are quite straightforward, such as making your way to a certain point and destroying a certain enemy or building, but there's also plenty of unique situations you'll find yourself in, like having to fend off waves of enemies whilst defending Air Force One. Taking a page from another FromSoft game known as a Toby, your mech has a limited stock of hit points. With a rechargeable shield, and getting hit will degenerate the shield, but avoiding attacks will restore it. This creates a nice balance of risk versus reward, but with the range of weapons at your disposal such as shotguns, machine guns and rockets, you're always on a level playing field with the enemy. While Metal Wolf Chaos is no Armored Core, it is a fine example of mech action that doesn't take itself too seriously, as its exaggerated and satirical take on, well, everything is charming, and in this genre, this is a breath of fresh air. Nex Machina is a twin-stick shooter that feels like a natural progression of the studio's previous game, Resogun. It possesses the same arcade spirit, level of challenge and longevity, but unlike Resogun and later efforts like Returnal, Nex Machina seems somewhat ignored when compared to them, and it's a shame really, as it's easily one of the studio's finest games. Now you've got several modes to jump into: arcade, arena, single world and local co-op that all offer up their own challenges. Each of them all possess the same 6 worlds that are all split up into about 15 levels each, with the last hosting a battle with a boss. As with Resogun, the gameplay is very fast paced and possesses a surprising amount of depth that is bound to keep even the most proficient players on their toes. To help you on your way, you're given many different power-ups and special weapons to get the job done. You've got shields, items that allow you to dash and weapon upgrades, as well as special weapons themselves such as rocket launchers, lasers and mines, which all have a role to play, adding a nice touch of strategy to the otherwise mindless shooting. Of course, all of these abilities are at risk should you die, as is your score multiplier, so taking risks and choosing when not to is the name of the game. But as you go through the stages, obstacles from the environment are added into the mix and become a sort of enemy within themselves. You'll need to use your quick reflexes and the dash function to get past them, which will save your life numerous times. Thanks to this, each level seems incredibly distinct from the last, while somewhat feeling familiar, demonstrating the exceptional attention that has gone into each of them. Nearly everything about this game is masterfully executed, from the colourful splashes of lasers that fill the screen to the nigh-on endless pursuit of your enemies. This is one game you will not want to put down. It had been a long time since we had seen another Valkyrie game, with the first appearing on the PlayStation in 2000, which was an interesting mix of both the platforming and RPG genres. The last entry was a short mobile experience that ended service in 2019, so with the news of Elysium, many fans were excited to jump back into what is quite possibly one of the most overlooked RPG series of recent time. As with the other games, you once again play as a god known as Valkyrie, who's tasked with purifying the souls of several undead beasts in order to prevent the end of the world. But what makes Elysium a bit different from past entries is that it's a hack and slash action RPG that sees all of the action playing out in real time as you fight your way through several stages and explore each of them to fulfill your goals. Throughout the game, you can work towards acquiring an impressive arsenal of weapons, and although you can only equip 2 at a time, there's still a lot of freedom to be found in the systems that make up the combat. You can perform a string of combos that differ depending on which ones you have equipped, as well as several finishes and special attacks that further spice up the gameplay. But further enhancing your chances of victory are the several divine art attacks that are basically summons and are all beholden to a meter that fills with each and every consecutive hit that you land. This sees you constantly keeping the heat on your enemies in an effort to fill the meter, creating a hectic but balanced combat system that's easy to jump into and get to grips with. Although it never quite reaches the heights of the earlier games in the series, Elysium still provides a pretty solid action RPG experience. It's an absolute blast for its fairly short length, and even though I can't help but feel that it could have been better, to see this old classic spread its wings once more, it's still something to be happy about. In Chorus, you take on the role of Nara, a very skilled pilot who is trying to escape from her past allegiances with a Borg-like faction who are committed to spreading something known as the Verb of the Choir, a state of absolute harmony that can be used to subdue the galaxy to their will. Helping you along the way is her ship that's a state-of-the-art fighter with a mind of its own, and it's absolutely packed with imaginative weaponry and abilities that make her cause all the more achievable. Now, although exploration is one of the key components of Chorus, it is complemented by the combat that is clearly the most engaging part of the game as a whole. You carry 3 main weapons, a turret, laser cannons and missile launchers, and you can use any one of them as you wish, but you need to keep in mind that each one attacks differently. It's up to you to decide which one is right for the situation at hand, as the more you advance you encounter new types of enemies with their own respective strengths and weaknesses. Now, apart from combat, simply exploring and flying around is just as exhilarating, and if that wasn't enough, there's a number of challenges such as making a certain type of maneuver a number of times, or killing a specific number of enemies with a particular weapon. Completing these side activities will be beneficial to you, since it will increase the damage you carry out or decrease the energy you spend when using your abilities. Chorus is a game that has possibly passed under the radar for many people, but I strongly recommend that you give it a chance. It has very satisfying combat, as well as an exploration component that actually rewards your curiosity, and to top it all off, the game looks absolutely gorgeous as you soar through the stars and take down your enemies in style. If you're fond of flying sims or just space-themed games in general, then Chorus is definitely something to check out. The Last Campfire is primarily a puzzle game that manages to weave a truly touching story about learning to let go and move on. You play as Ember, a small hooded figure who finds himself lost within a mysterious world filled with creatures who have all but given up hope of finding their way home. It's up to you to help them overcome their fears that are holding them back, which takes the form of various mini-puzzles that rely on a distinctive theme. These range from moving objects to rotating blocks and even weather-based puzzles that come together to offer an extreme amount of variety, and although not all of the Last Campfire's puzzles are that difficult, solving them nevertheless provides a real sense of accomplishment. This is mainly due to the emotional setup of each character you come across, which often bleeds into the puzzle they ask you to solve. Take the example of a rusty robot that was once brimming with creativity but has since lost it. The puzzle sees you finding a tiny spark and helping him to fan it into a roaring flame that returns the robot's desire to create. One of the Last Campfire's most endearing qualities, though, has to be its visual makeup. Simply exploring each of the areas you come across is an absolute joy thanks to its simple and vibrant design. Ranging from charming to downright terrifying, it's so easy to get fully immersed in the game's mysterious world and characters, and the only issue I had with it, to be honest, was its length. It was just over far too quickly, which of course is nothing that detracts from the overall enjoyment of the gameplay, but once you finish the 5 to 6 hour adventure, you'll likely be yearning for more to do and see. With its generous amount of challenge and a story that'll likely stick with you for quite some time, The Last Campfire is definitely worth checking out if you're fond of solving puzzles. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is a platformer that mixes together both RPG elements and farming to create a truly unique adventure. The story takes place in Japanese folklore, where Sakuna herself is banished to an island teeming with demons and is tasked with watching over the people that reside there until a way back home can be established. It's not exactly the best aspect of the game by any means, but it does bring with it several light-hearted moments and serves to build the incredible atmosphere that permeates throughout the adventure. Now, the gameplay is mainly split up into two different styles. The first is an action platformer that sees you exploring several side-scrolling levels and defeating demons to acquire various resources that are needed to cook items. Some of these are extremely well hidden, and while platforming is a huge part of the game, it's mainly the combat that takes center stage. You've got a few attacks at your disposal and several skills that require SP to use, which slowly regenerates over the course of each level. But bringing all of this together is the pretty handy grappling hook that not only facilitates your movement, but also comes into play during fights. It's not all about battles, however. As I mentioned earlier, farming plays a huge role in the game as well, and it is one of the ways you look after the people under your care. Early on, it's pretty straightforward, with you having to plant seeds and removing weeds from the fields, but as you progress, you quickly learn there's a lot more to it, such as having to dry your crops or even adding fertilizer to help increase your yield. This is the only means to level Sakuna up as well, so it soon becomes a vital part of the game, and finding different types of ingredients is crucial to grow in an effective way. If you're looking for a fresh take on the farming genre with several action and RPG aspects thrown in, then Sakuna is definitely worth seeking out. Relayer is an SRPG that takes place well into the future, where mankind have ventured to the stars. By doing so, they attracted the attention of an alien race who aren't exactly the friendly kind, forcing them to stand up against them through the use of stellar gear robots, a technology reverse engineered from the aliens themselves. While the plot begins relatively simple, little by little things take on gigantic proportions, with the game being full of very interesting twists, making great use of the ideas it presents and exploring them without exaggerating too much in the amount of dialogue. Now, apart from the narrative, there are two main areas where Relayer excels, and that's its combat and the character progression system. All of the action takes place on a grid, very much like the Fire Emblem series, with each battle revolving around both your positioning and a statistic known as aggro. The greater your aggro, the more chance there is that the enemy will prioritize their attack on that unit, instead of others within its reach. This ends up determining how each of your units work. You've got tanks, whose main function is to increase your level of aggro and concentrate the attacks on themselves and allow the other units to attack. These are Assault and Sniper, with Assault focusing on moving to the front of the battlefield and causing damage quickly, and Snipers in attacking from afar and causing negative effects on the enemy. It's a great system that serves a healthy dose of strategy, and while it's quite simple at the beginning, it soon escalates into one of the most demanding SRPGs on the PS4. With its lush visuals, heart-pounding soundtrack and gripping narrative, Relayer is well worth giving a go for all you mech fans out there. Ninja Saviors originally released many years ago on the Super Nintendo and would go on to become one of the most overlooked games you can find on that console. Fast forward to 2019 and it saw a re-release for modern consoles that kept everything that was so enjoyable about the original intact, all the while updating and improving many aspects of the game to make it even better. Much like the original game, you take on the role of one of several robot ninjas as you track down an evil tyrant with a seemingly endless army of grunts, which will try anything to stop you from taking him down. As with most beat-em-ups, each of the characters all have their own unique traits, with the usual slow heavy hitter, fast nimble fighter, a middle-of-the-road character to use to suit your playstyle. There's a heavy emphasis on combos, and carefully using them at the right time is the perfect way to deal with groups of enemies that swarm you at once, and with the variety of your attacks, Ninja Savior never feels dull. As you would expect, the game is set over a series of levels that amp up the intensity the further you progress, with several boss fights that bookend each of them. These fights is where Ninja Savior truly comes alive, as unlike with the normal grunts you'll be facing off against, each of these bosses possess their own abilities and patterns that require you to take your time and not just mindlessly bash away and hope for the best. Visually, the game retains its sprite-based setup and truly excels when it comes to character design. The sheer amount of different enemy types and gorgeous detail of each is only matched by the post-apocalyptic backgrounds that make up the levels. When it comes down to it, Ninja Saviors delivers on all fronts, from the solid gameplay to the surprisingly interesting story and imaginative design. It's for sure one of the best beat-em-ups that you can get on the PS4. God Eater began its run on the PSP in 2010 and went on to become a huge success, with many players around the world being drawn into its explosive combat and addictive systems that saw you creating a character and progressing their abilities over the course of the game. Essentially a hack and slash action RPG, the player gets to wield something known as a God Arc weapon that has the ability to transform into several different states, and sets out in a post-apocalyptic world where gods known as the Origami have all but leveled human society. Of course, in between the story drama that presents itself throughout the course of the adventure is the gameplay, and there is more than plenty of that available. The core of it remains very much the same when compared to the previous entries, and still revolves around defeating enemies that wield parts, as well as crafting materials that lead to new upgrades and loadouts as you progress. The combat itself is both fast-paced and chaotic, which doesn't let up for a second as you tackle huge enemies that reply in kind. You've got basic attacks that form combos, as well as a powered up state known as Burst that grants you boosted stats and even extra abilities to slay your target. It may take some time to get used to when first starting out, but once you realise that you need to be quick on both offense and defense if you want to survive, it all slowly begins to click, and this is where God Eater 3 really comes into its own. With its nigh on endless amount of customization options and weapons to use in battle, there's never a dull moment, as you'll constantly find yourself always working towards something new to make yourself more powerful. If you're a fan of the old games or even the likes of Monster Hunter, then God Eater 3 is definitely worth checking out. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2, as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos that release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, Elihu and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.